Imagine stepping into the cockpit, ready for takeoff, but the world outside is, it's a frozen wonderland. It's not just about flicking on the defroster, you know. For pilots, cold weather operations are this really meticulous dance of precision. It's a constant battle against the elements, really, to ensure safety, maintain aircraft performance, and quite literally stay in the air. So this deep dive, we're focusing on understanding the incredible complexities of flying in icy conditions. We're pulling back the curtain, drawing directly from Captain Ashutosh Chopra's Commercial Pilot's Handbook, which is, it's a really authoritative guide for any pilot who needs to be well-informed. Our mission today is to unpack the critical considerations, some surprising dangers too, giving you a shortcut to understanding the precise mastery pilots need. Okay, so the moment a pilot even steps onto the tarmac in freezing conditions, the clock starts ticking, doesn't it? It's a whole series of challenges. This isn't just about preparing for the flight itself. It's this meticulous, time-sensitive ground dance, even before the plane leaves the gate.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Pre-flight planning in cold weather, it goes way beyond just thinking about, potential ice once you're cruising. It demands separate, really dedicated attention for departure, for the en route phase, and of course for your destination.
Right, 3 distinct phases.
Exactly. So, for example, at departure destination, you might absolutely need ground anti-icing or de-icing. That's pretty common. And you'll definitely have to factor in how contaminated runways will affect performance big time. Then when you're thinking of the en route part, that could mean carrying extra fuel or making adjustments to mitigate performance issues that might crop up later on. And it's also crucial, really crucial, that the flight briefing covers every single cold weather aspect. It just enhances situational awareness so much, making sure the crew is completely prepared for what might be ahead.
We've all heard about de-icing delays, haven't we? Sitting on the plane, watching the trucks spray that fluid. But what happens after that? There's this crucial kind of misunderstood window of protection involved, isn't there? Something called holdover time.
It's exactly holdover time. It's basically the approximate period that the de-icing or anti-icing fluids will effectively protect the aircraft, protect it from accumulating new ice or snow. Now, these times, they're meticulously published by regulators, FAA, EASA, and they vary quite a bit. Depends on the type of precipitation falling, how cold it actually is, and the specific fluid being used.
So it's not just one standard time.
Oh, not at all. And the critical point is this. If that holdover time expires before you take off, then a complete recontamination check, or maybe even another full de-icing procedure, is mandatory. No question. And after the de-icing, the ground crew must give the pilot specific info, like the fluid type they're identified by color, type 1 through type 4. Type 4 gives the longest protection. Also, its precise concentration, the exact start and finish times of the procedure, and really important, a clear confirmation that an icing decontamination check has been carried out.
Okay, so this whole meticulous process, the de-icing, the timing, it leads us to one of aviation's most fundamental safety principles, the clean aircraft concept.
Mm-hmm.
What does that truly mean for a pilot? What does clean really mean here?
It's non-negotiable. Simple as that. The clean aircraft concept means all aircraft surfaces, and I mean all surfaces, including critical control surfaces like flaps and ailerons, must be completely free from any contamination. So no ice, no snow, no slush. Nothing.
And why is that so absolute?
Well, because here's the surprising part. Even a tiny film of ice, maybe just, 3 millimeters thick, like a layer of frost almost on a wing, that can reduce its lift by over 30%. 30%. And it can drastically change its stall speed, that tiny bit of roughness. So that can turn a completely routine takeoff into a dangerously unpredictable maneuver. Every single performance calculation, everything the computers do, is based on that aircraft being perfectly clean. It has to be to ensure predictable aerodynamic capability. Pilots treat every surface like a pristine canvas, for very good reason. And to operate safely, pilots also work with very precise definitions, things like icing conditions and runway contamination. They aren't just casual terms. For instance, icing conditions exist whenever the air temperature that's TAT in the air, or OAT on the ground, is 10 degrees Celsius or less.
10 degrees? That's not even freezing yet.
Right. 10 degrees C or less, and there's visible moisture. Think clouds, fog, rain, snow, sleet, whatever. Or if there's standing water, slush, snow, or ice present on the ground surfaces, it's a much broader safety net than you might think. And runway contamination, that means more than 25% of the runway surface area is covered by water or slush deeper than 3 millimeters. Or if snow is compacted so much that it's basically solid, or if there's just ice on the runway. These definitions dictate exactly how a pilot has to operate.
Okay, so we're talking visible ice, snow, slush. But you mentioned something earlier. You wouldn't think the fuel itself could cause ice on the outside, would you? But cold-soaked fuel, that sounds like a really hidden danger most people wouldn't even consider.
It is, yeah. Cold-soaked fuel is a definite hidden threat. What happens is when fuel in the tanks gets extremely cold, maybe after a long flight at high altitude, sitting up there for hours, it can actually cause frost to form on the outside of the aircraft surfaces, usually the wings, when moist air comes into contact with that super chilled metal skin.
Wow, so the cold transfers right through.
Exactly. Now, aircraft manuals, they specify acceptable frost levels. It can differ between their upper and lower wing surfaces sometimes. You might be allowed a very slight amount, maybe up to 3 millimeters nominally on the lower surfaces. But critically, absolutely none should exist on any control surfaces. Ailerons, elevators, rudders, totally clean. And this brings us right back to the pre-flight walk-around. In these conditions, it requires just meticulous care, really paying attention. This includes carefully checking all the pressure sensors, the pitot tubes, static ports, angle of attack vanes, make sure they're completely free from ice or blockage. And of course, the control surfaces themselves must be thoroughly checked for any icing.
I can almost picture it, a pilot out there freezing cold, running their bare hand carefully over a wing surface, trying to feel for that clear ice. Because it sounds like detective work almost, you know? Clear ice is so deceptive you can see right through it, apparently. So touching it is the only way.
Physical touch is often necessary, yes. And the absolute rule, something drilled into pilots, is never accept any snow on the aircraft thinking, oh, it'll just blow off during takeoff. It doesn't. Snow sticks. And worse, it can hide a dangerous layer of clear ice underneath it. Pilots also have to inspect the tire condition, check the undercarriage doors aren't frozen up, and confirm full and free movement of all the flight controls. Often they use a dedicated cold weather checklist just to make sure nothing, absolutely nothing, is missed.
Okay, so let's fast forward. All these meticulous ground checks are done, the de-icing worked, holdover time is good, the aircraft's cleared for takeoff. You might think the battle with ice is kind of over, or at least won for now. But that's really not the case, is it? The real fight, in many ways, it just begins in a whole new, almost insidious way once you're actually in the air.
Indeed. Yeah, immediately after takeoff, as you climb through those cold layers of air, you're looking out for things like freezing rain. That can impact the wing, flow back along its surface, and then refreeze further back. That can literally freeze control surfaces solid or restrict their movement. And any ice accumulation on the leading edge of the wing, whether it's, clear ice, milky rime ice, or that mixed stuff, it profoundly alters the way air flows over the wing.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes the wing's shape, its aerodynamic profile, and how it grips the air, so to speak.
Right. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, ice on a wing isn't just about adding weight, is it? It's more like a silent saboteur of the aerodynamics. You're saying even a small, maybe rough patch on that critical leading edge can disrupt the airflow so much that it effectively kind of shrinks the wing's lifting ability, stealing lift and maybe forcing the aircraft into a stall at much higher speeds you wouldn't expect. It's like flying with part of your wing missing, but you can barely even see the problem.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it. The critical effects are a significant reduction in lift at any given angle of attack. Also, a reduced stalling angle of attack, meaning it stalls earlier at a lower angle, and completely altered approach to stall characteristics. It might not give you the usual warnings, and if ice builds up unevenly, say more on one wing than the other, it can make the aircraft behave unpredictably, maybe rolling unexpectedly when it approaches a stall, instead of just mushing downwards. That makes a critical maneuver far more dangerous. And while the effect of icing might be less noticeable at high speeds, like in cruise flight, it becomes significantly more impactful at lower speeds, like during approach and landing. It creates very challenging situations for the pilot, potentially even preventing a proper flare just before touchdown. And what's also quite concerning is how an engaged autopilot can sometimes mask these effects of icing. The autopilot keeps the wings level, keeps the plane on track, but it might be working harder and harder against the accumulating ice, and the pilot doesn't feel it directly.
So the system is compensating, hiding the problem.
In a way, yes. Which means that when the autopilot is subsequently disengaged, maybe for the final approach, the pilot might suddenly experience an aircraft that's way out of trim. Or they might get unexpected control deflections, or just generally abnormal aircraft behavior that they weren't anticipating at all.
That sounds, fascinating and terrifying. The autopilot masking the effects. So how do pilots train for that? What's the protocol if they disengage and suddenly the aircraft feels wrong?
Well, it means pilots must always be prepared for unexpected aircraft behavior. especially when changing configuration, like extending flaps or lowering the gear after they know they've been exposed to freezing or icing conditions. They're trained to anticipate this possibility, to be ready to react smoothly and correctly. And beyond the direct aerodynamic effects, you can have failures in the heated aircraft sensors, your pitot tubes, static ports, AOA vanes again. If the heating fails and they ice up, you can get completely erroneous indications of crucial data, altitude, airspeed, angle of attack. And since that information feeds into so many other systems, the flight computers, the autopilot, the stall warnings, a large number of related parameters can be affected. So pilots have to be really on guard if they suspect any issues with those heating systems.
And beyond that visible ice, or ice on sensors, you mentioned this other type, an often invisible type of icing. The one responsible for, nearly 75% of engine thrust loss events? It's huge.
That's ice crystal icing, yes. And it's fundamentally different from the icing caused by supercooled liquid water droplets that we usually think about forming on the airframe. Ice crystal icing involves tiny ice crystals, not liquid water, and it can occur deep inside an engine, in the compressor stages, even when there's no visible icing on the wings or fuselage at all. And here's the kicker. It's often not detected by standard ice detectors, because they're typically designed to look for supercooled liquid water hitting a probe.
So it sneaks past the detectors?
It can, yes. And this can cause a really insidious, gentle stagnation or rollback in engine thrust. It might happen so slowly it goes unnoticed initially, until, that is, there's a large reduction in airspeed, which grossly reduces controllability, or maybe even causes an unexpected stall. This issue is particularly critical at high altitudes, where the flight envelope, the difference between stalling speed and maximum speed, is already quite restricted. There's less margin for error. And there are other engine issues, too. Ice forming on, say, hydraulically powered control surfaces might break away when they're moved, but then the chunks can lodge somewhere else, causing restrictions later. Similarly, ice forming at the engine inlets can break away and cause major problems when it's ingested by the engine. That can potentially reduce engine performance, increase engine vibration, maybe to uncontrollable levels, and even cause compressor stalls or engine surges. Violent events.
Okay, so if ice is building up inside the engine, or suspected, how do pilots actually clear it out mid-flight? You can't exactly get out and scrape it.
No, you can't. The only way, really, to clear internal ice buildup in the engine is by increasing thrust periodically. This increases temperatures inside the engine, and the airflow helps shed the ice. It might cause a temporary increase in engine vibration as the ice breaks off and goes through. That's generally acceptable, as long as the vibration remains within published limits. And it's also important to remember, just like the airframe sensors, the engine's own temperature and pressure sensors can also be affected by icing, which could lead to a loss of thrust or an erroneous thrust setting being indicated to the pilot. More confusion.
Wow. So the pilot is up there battling these incredibly complex forces, visible and invisible. What are the key strategies then? What are the critical decisions for staying safe and ultimately getting the aircraft down on the ground?
Well, the primary mitigation strategy, if the situation allows, is usually a controlled descent to lower, warmer altitudes. Get below the freezing level to melt off any accumulated ice. Though, of course, this might result in unplanned fuel consumption, which needs to be considered. A really key principle, though, is about engine anti-icing. It should never be delayed or based only on seeing visible ice building up. It must be used whenever icing conditions are present or anticipated. Even if it seems preemptive, you turn it on before you get significant ice.
Proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. Then you have wing anti-ice systems. They're also vital, of course, but they put an extra strain on the engines. They need a lot of hot bleed air diverted from the engines to heat the wing leading edges. This demand can be aggravated at high altitudes where engines already produce less thrust. And since the pilots often can't directly see the whole wing from the flight deck, they might look for indications of icing on things they can see, like windscreen wipers or other small protrusions, as a cue that wing icing might be happening. And what's quite crucial here, and a bit different from engine anti-ice, is the typical use of wing anti-ice. It's usually operated in a de-icing mode. That means you allow some ice to build up, then you turn on the heat periodically to shed it.
Why not just leave it on continuously, like an anti-icing mode?
Good question. It's because using it continuously in anti-icing mode could cause the melted water to flow back beyond the heated leading edge and then refreeze further aft on the wing surface. That can create what's called run-back ice, causing aerodynamic issues or jamming control surfaces. Also, on some aircraft, using wing anti-ice on the ground might even be prohibited because the leading edges can get extremely hot without airflow. And the high bleed air demand can sometimes restrict its use during takeoff, or it might even shut off automatically when TOGA, that's the maximum takeoff go-around power setting, is engaged. Although, for extended holding and icing conditions, using it continuously as an anti-icier might actually be beneficial, depending on the aircraft type. Another point. Generally, extending flaps in icing conditions should be avoided if possible, and it's usually prohibited if you have to hold in known icing conditions. Keep the wing clean. Now, in the absence of dedicated ice detection systems, the aircraft's computers often become aware of icing conditions only when the pilot manually activates the anti-icing systems.
Ah, so flicking the switch tells the computer, hey, we're in ice now.
Essentially, yes. That action often triggers the flight computers to automatically reset certain parameters, like the calculated buffet and stall speed limits, providing an increased safety margin. However, this reset, may not always be sufficient for the actual amount or type of ice accrued. So pilots still need to be vigilant for any uncommanded roll, pitch, or yaw, especially at lower speeds. Increasing approach speeds, flying a bit faster than normal on final approach, is also advisable, provided it's within the permissible limits for landing performance on the available runway length. And remember that substantial demand of anti-icing systems on engine bleed air. That can require increased thrust settings just to maintain normal flight. This impacts descent profiles too. It might prevent fuel-saving idle thrust descents, and could potentially force the aircraft to spend extra time descending through colder levels than desired.
Okay, this is getting really complex. Now, for landing, there's something you mentioned called cold weather altimeter corrections. This sounds really counterintuitive, but absolutely vital. You said it's like your GPS or altimeter telling you you're at, say, 10,000 feet, but really you're actually lower, maybe 9,600 feet. That's a huge difference when you're aiming for a runway near mountains or obstacles.
Precisely. That's the core issue. When an aircraft flies from warmer air into a colder air mass, the air column below it shrinks, it becomes denser. But the pressure altimeter doesn't know the temperature, it just senses pressure. So in cold air, the altimeter will overread. It shows you higher than you actually are. Your true altitude is lower than your indicated altitude.
Lower, got it. So what are the implications for landing?
Big implications. For precision approaches like category ILS, which gives you both lateral and vertical guidance down to a specific point, this overreading primarily manifests itself right at the end, at the decision altitude or DA. You'll reach the indicated DA, but your true height above the runway will be less. However, for non-precision approaches, the ones that give you lateral guidance but rely on the pilot managing the vertical path using altitudes from the chart, or maybe using the aircraft's VNAV system, well, that's where it gets trickier. If you don't apply altimeter corrections, the VNAV system, working off the uncorrected indicated altitude, will guide the aircraft down on a shallower path and consistently lower than the prescribed descent profile on the chart. This could easily put you outside the permissible vertical deviation limits, and more importantly, significantly reduce your clearance above terrain or obstacles along the approach path. Very dangerous.
Now, some airports, particularly in very cold regions, might specify a lower temperature limit below which certain non-precision approaches are not authorized unless the aircraft's flight management computer, the FMC, can actually apply temperature corrections to the VNAV path itself. Below that temperature, they assume the inherent errors without correction might be acceptable. But for all other conditions, especially when it's significantly colder than standard, cold weather altimeter corrections will be required. And the correction always results in an increased altitude that the pilot must fly. You add the correction factor to all the minimum altitudes on the approach chart.
So you deliberately fly higher on your altimeter to maintain the correct true altitude profile.
Exactly. You add the correction to the minimum safe altitude, MSA, to the final approach fix, FAF altitude, to all the step down to fix altitudes on the chart, and crucially to the decision altitude, DA, or minimum descent altitude, MDA.
So, okay, for someone trying to visualize this, what's the actual impact? Is there a simple rule of thumb for how much lower you really are?
There is a common rule of thumb. Your actual altitude, your true altitude, will be about 4% lower than indicated for every 10 degrees Celsius that the outside air temperature is below the ISA standard temperature for that altitude. So if it's 20 degrees colder than standard, you're roughly 8% lower than your altimeter says. To give you a sense of the scale from charts, the altitude air is approximately 10% of your height above the airfield at negative 10 degrees Celsius. That increases to around 30% lower by the time you get down to negative 50 degrees Celsius. It's significant. The critical point, the thing to burn into your memory, is always, in cold conditions, your true altitude is lesser than the indicated altitude unless you correct for it. And then finally, even after you've landed safely in very cold temperatures, the job isn't quite done. Pilots often perform specific post-landing checks. This might include a thorough inspection of control surfaces, especially flaps and slats looking for any residual ice. Sometimes they might even need to leave the flaps or slats extended for a while after parking to allow any hidden ice to fully melt and dissipate before retracting them.
Wow. This deep dive has really revealed how pilots navigate this incredibly complex, often invisible world of ice, its profound impact on literally every single phase of flight, from those meticulous pre-flight checks and the absolute necessity of the clean aircraft concept, through the really precise performance calculations needed for takeoff on contaminated runways, then battling the complex aerodynamic challenges of in-flight icing, both visible and hidden inside the engines, and finally applying those counterintuitive but absolutely vital cold weather altimeter corrections just to make a safe landing. It's incredible. So next time you hear about a flight delay because of weather or de-icing, maybe take a second to consider the incredible precision, the depth of knowledge required. It's needed to safely navigate these subtle yet incredibly powerful forces of cold weather. It truly is a silent, intricate dance between the pilot, the machine, and the environment. It goes so far beyond what meets the eye from the passenger cabin, which makes you wonder, doesn't it, what other hidden complexities might be at play in other seemingly routine situations you encounter every day.